So hello everybody, today I'm going to talk about a video, so this is going to be kind of a little bit of a video reaction. The video in question was in my feed. It's by, I don't even know who made it. I've never heard of this person before, and the video was essentially saying why we shouldn't be playing Dungeons and Dragons because it's such a tired system. And I was interested because I just wanted, I really dislike the videos that say why you shouldn't be doing this or why you are doing this wrong, because especially in role-playing, there is no right or wrong, and there's also no this is how you should be doing it or this is how it should be done, because role-playing, probably unlike any other game that I know of, while it does have rules, and there are different systems with different rules, and some claim to be rules light and then it turns out that they're actually not rules light at all, rely on what we in linguistics call negotiation of meaning. So basically, yes, there are rules, for example, the mathematically derived rules of probability as well, but also rules like when you roll a die and you are looking for a particular target number and there is no modification unless the target number appears on the die, you didn't make it. What happens after when you fail, or what happens after when you are successful, is down to the people at the table. And how you deal with success and failure, how you deal with things like attributes, characteristics, skills. And basically this person went on for 30 odd minutes saying why nobody should be playing D&D. And he said that he had, and it was a he, arguments. And arguably, he didn't have any arguments. He had opinions, which is fine. And when I was listening to him explaining what other things you should be playing because D&D is so bad, I really had to laugh. So the first reason that he gives for not playing D&D is one that I will just put out there, because I think of anything that he said, this is possibly one that I could stand behind and say, yes, if this is how you feel, don't buy any products for D&D, because you would be supporting Hasbro and WotC, and they are terrible companies. And I agree. If you feel that you don't like the business practices of either Hasbro or WotC or the two of them, do not go out and support them in any way. Don't buy MTG. Don't buy any D&D related products. And that's out of the way now. So basically, this is a point that I can understand. And if this is how you feel, yes, by all means, do not play D&D. The next one he came up with was that it is so tired because of its tropes. It's always the same races, species, whatever you want to call them, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, okay. Arguably, of all of the games that I have ever played, and I've played so many different role-playing games in the fantasy sphere. Let's not even talk about other spheres but fantasy. I would say it's probably the one that has the most diverse species catalogue of all, the most diverse planescape of all, because you have so many different planes. You can play Eberron, you can play Barovia, you can play Greyhawk has now come out with 2024. So it has been republished, which I was very surprised that I didn't see that coming at all. You have Waterdeep, which in and of itself is a world of its own, and we are actually playing a campaign in Waterdeep. You have Baldur's Gate, which again is its own world. You can play in the area where Rime of the Frost Maiden is set. You have Kryn as a world. Faerun, of course, is another. Even there, you have so many different ones. You have the Moonshades, you have the Deep South, Chult. It is most diverse. And when I compare it to other fantasy games that I know really well, for example, Midgard, the oldest German one, which has a huge world, which is really well described, but which is a geophysically real world. They asked a friend of theirs who was a geographer, to create the world for them. So when you look at the world of Midgard as it is, when you see an ocean, when you see a river, when you see a mountain, they are like it would be if you lived on a spherical planet that is Earth-like from an atmospheric point of view. And you have it all there. Then you have the Dark Eye, das schwarze Auge, where you also have a world that is a lot like Europe. And again, you have the most diverse cultures, but with regard to species, you don't have as many. You have the normal fantasy trope ones: humans, elves, half-elves, dwarves, and more recently, am I forgetting anything? Humans, elves, dwarves, half-elves. Most recently, they have been bringing in others. You can now play saurians, so basically you play like reptilian PCs. But usually this is normal, and I would say that D&D is outside the norm because simply of its number of different species, of different classes. And of course this has a downside because, and this is what he also says, for a new player, so on the one hand he criticizes that it's so tired and so samey, but then on the other hand he says that there is so much going on there that a new starter will be overwhelmed, which I agree. Whichever system you look at, is it Pathfinder, is it the Dark Eye 5th edition, is it Midgard 5th edition, is it D&D, especially 3.5, which people really loved because of Pathfinder as well, definitely not 5th edition though, you are overwhelmed. But you don't, as a new starter, look at everything that was ever published for 5th edition. You look at the player's handbook, and there you have a couple of species and you have a couple of classes, and that's it. That the player's handbook of 2014 5th edition is badly written, we all agree upon. 5.5, while it has its problems, has a really well written book. So I would say that this has lowered the accessibility threshold a lot. With regard to tropes, then he says, okay, it's also samey, it's all fantasy. And I'm like, yeah, that's it. But when I look at the differences in the different settings, and I've read so many, D&D is superior to most other games that I know, also due to its long history. And then he says, yeah, and they're just rehashing the stuff that has been around for a long time. Actually, Rime of the Frost Maiden is new to 5e. Barovia has been around for a very long time, but interestingly enough, I believe that the Barovia complex is probably the most engaging one and the one that people most often speak about and remember most fondly, simply because it is full of decisions and full of problems that you need to solve. Then he cites games that he thinks are better, and he cites the One Ring. And the One Ring is a terrible game. And by that, I mean the mechanics of 1st and 2nd edition. Maybe there's now another one, and I know that there are other role-playing games that are set in Tolkien's world, probably of different mechanics. But the One Ring and the One Ring 2nd edition were created by a guy who makes board games, namely the War of the Ring. And you can tell because he decided that he's going to make a role-playing game, but use board gaming mechanics, and it simply doesn't work. It simply does not work. I have bought everything that came out for the One Ring first edition simply because I'm an absolute fan of Gareth Ryder Hanrahan, who wrote most, if not all, of the content. And his source books are brilliant. They are great. You can't use them outside of Tolkien's world because they are so specifically Tolkien. You could probably adapt the system, but this brings me to the problem that I have with Tolkien-based role-playing games, or games in general, but role-playing is even worse. Tolkien and Tolkien's world focus on several very clearly defined epochs in Middle-earth and outside of Middle-earth. If we look at the Silmarillion, lots of things happen in the Undying Lands before the Sundering and so on and so forth. And then, of course, there is Numenor, which sank. And for most of these things, nobody has the rights. So the only thing that they have are the rights to The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and the appendices. And it means that they only see a very small fraction and can only talk about a very small fraction of things that are actually there. However, starting with The Hobbit and ending with The Lord of the Rings, Middle-earth is pretty much devoid of peoples. And by peoples, I mean peoples. Not just humans, but everyone. The elves are running away. The dwarves are hiding in the Blue Mountains. Some of them are in Dale and Undermountain, but that's it. And of course, we've got the ones that got lost in Moria. However, vast stretches of land are completely empty. When you look at the Shire, and then the road to Bree, and then that finally ends in Rivendell, north and south of this road, in Eriador, in Arnor, it's empty. There are people here and there. There may be a homesteader somewhere. There are the rangers that are trying to keep the orcs at bay. So orcs in some places are there. But you can't play orcs. So really, when you talk about tropes, in Tolkien's role-playing games you have elves, dwarves, halflings, hobbits. It's all you can play. 3 races, 3 species. That's it. Humans, sorry. Yeah, I forgot that. How could I forget humans? I always play humans. But that's it, you know. So that's a really old trope because it's arguably the oldest fantasy trope we have. Everything else was derived from this OG. So, okay, as far as tropes go, Tolkien is probably the most boring one because in addition to that, you have sworn enmity between elves and dwarves until after the Ring War. Because the 2 guys that managed to bring the 2 peoples together were Gimli and Legolas. Their friendship, which crossed species boundaries, was the reason why the 2 peoples were reconciled. If you don't believe me, read up on it. That's the way it is. Now, all of this stuff that happens in the Hobbit movies with this elf woman falling for this dwarf would never have happened. The 2 of them would have been completely anathema, and the enmity ran so deep that there was no bridging of the gap possible. It was actually one of the things that Tolkien showed, that you have this warforged band of love between Gimli and Legolas because they saw that in the face of actual all-out war, and Legolas has been very old at the time already, so he's seen many, many things, can bring them together. That when you're faced with a blade, everybody becomes the same. And that is one of the tropes of Tolkien's book, The Lord of the Rings, is friendship and the bridging of the gap. So if you play Lord of the Rings in any shape or form, the role-playing game, and you have a dwarf and an elf in your party, that's not working. Because not until after the War of the Ring can the 2 reconcile. So if we are talking about tropes, enmity between peoples is a trope. It is also part of the mechanics for the Lord of the Rings, for the One Ring role-playing game, because you have this attitude scores that come into play. So the tropes of the Lord of the Rings games or related games are very boring. They're like, you run around, you search, you do a little bit of, you try to suck up to people that don't like you in order to get stuff done. Fighting is possible, but it's really neither here nor there. All of the source books are source books. I have not ever seen a very well written adventure. It's just source books and then build your own. You can do this, but I would say actually number one, if I was a new starter, Lord of the Rings or the One Ring and Lord of the Rings related franchises are probably going to be completely overwhelming, because if you were to play true to the tropes, you can't. So it would have to be modified. Me as a purist, I would actually say no, I'm not interested in this. And it is the oldest franchise. It's the oldest trope list. And so a lot more tired than D&D. And it's also completely unvaried, because Lord of the Rings, its world in the Third Age is simply boring. There is nothing there. And I also wouldn't want to play the War of the Ring, because that's simply boring. And I wouldn't want to play The Hobbit, because that's also boring, because you already know how it ends. So then he goes on to say, okay, it's D&D is so battle focused. This is what this is about. And I'm like, okay, I think that really depends on what your group is into, because then he says, well, you have got Shadow Dark, and that's great. And I'm like, okay, Shadow Dark is super dungeon crawly. That's what it does. It's a dungeon crawler with a lot of combat. So if you're saying D&D 5th edition is so combat oriented, then please don't mention Shadow Dark, because that's, if you look at role playing with an emphasis on ROLE, all of the OSR games, and Shadow Dark is one of them, and I backed the Kickstarter and I love Kelsey Dion's work, is the least comparable, because they are all about combat, leveling up, going into a dungeon or into a fight situation, killing everything around you and looting. That's what this is about. And Shadow Dark, for those of you who don't know it, has a mechanic which is called Lights Out, or I call it Lights Out. So basically, in order to ensure that people don't spend too much time, and in order to put the pressure on the players, and it plays a lot like a little bit of a board game in my opinion, is you have a limited amount of time, and this is measured in 60 minutes real time, because that's how long it takes for a torch to die out. So if you have more torches, then I guess you can relight them and then spend more time, but after 60 minutes it's pitch black. That has its merits. And that's a very interesting concept, but it doesn't compare to 5th edition or D&D or Pathfinder 3rd, 2nd or 1st edition, or Midgard for that matter, or DSA, Das Schwarze Auge, the Dark Eye, because it's a completely different concept. Absolutely, totally different. It's a very interesting concept, but it's not necessarily what most people think of when they think of role-playing, because this is not about role-playing. This is about min-maxing. This is about having the right combination of characters to go in and face a challenge. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's not role-playing that is comparable to what D&D is trying to offer, and what D&D is offering to many people, and also what all the games that came out after in reaction to the OGL thing, like Fantasy Age 2nd edition, like whatever it was that Cobalt Press put out, they're also not like the OSR games, the old school role-playing games. So that's his tip, saying that D&D is so battle focused, which it actually isn't. It depends on what you want to do. On the contrary, you have plenty of skills that you can use to do other things, to play social interactions, to solve things like sleight of hand problems, etc., etc. And interestingly enough, for those of you who don't know, in the very old versions of D&D, skills didn't exist. But they were introduced later because the authors realized that when you give somebody this old character sheet, people simply didn't know what to do. This idea of sitting down and saying, okay, there's a room, what do you do? People were like, I don't know. By giving them skills, they realized what kind of options there are. I could investigate, I don't know, role perception, whatever. However, some people say that this limited people's theatre of mind's abilities, that it limited their creativity. I'm not sure. Possibly, but one also has to say that the old versions of D&D were never about role-playing. They were about you go into the dungeon, you kill everything in sight, and you loot and you run out and you get gold, and gold is converted into XP and makes you advance your character. So it wasn't really a question. And also when you look at the other side, when you look at Call of Cthulhu, which he also mentions favorably as something you should be playing instead of D&D, where I'm like, well, first of all, it's a completely different setting. The story is completely different. But he says, well, you know, D&D is so battle-focused, but Call of Cthulhu isn't. You know, you have so many ways of gaining experience through doing other things. And I'm like, yes, but the reason is that when you do battle in Call of Cthulhu, you usually die. And player characters are super squishy. They cannot cast spells, because if you cast a spell, you go more and more insane, whereas the cultists do cast spells because they've gone completely insane. So this asymmetrical way of putting or pitting your player characters against monsters or opponents is something that I truly dislike about Chaosium's Call of Cthulhu, because it doesn't make any sense. If I cast a spell, I grow crazier. And if my sanity drops to 0, I can't act. Whereas all of the cultists are already at 0 and they can do whatever they like. How come that they're still functioning? This is something that I always disliked. Having said this, I dislike almost anything that Chaosium has ever put out. I think it's really badly made. The adventures are usually unplayable. But it's true that all of the skills, and there are so many, so that's overwhelming as well. And when you build a character in 7th edition Call of Cthulhu, you are overwhelmed because there are so many tropes that are also really tired because they go back to H.P. Lovecraft, so that predates Tolkien. And building a character isn't that easy actually either. So essentially you make your character and then you have all of these skills that you have to use. Most of them are actually completely useless. Call of Cthulhu is the game where you have the illusion of choice by having so many different skills, whereas in reality you usually only use spot hidden, maybe listen, and maybe, you know, geography or something, survival, depending on what you really do. But most of the time, most of the skills are unused, because they are not usable, because they are very situational, and unless you happen to be in that situation, you will not be using them. So I love Call of Cthulhu, I play it regularly, but hey, saying you shouldn't be playing D&D because there's Call of Cthulhu out there, doesn't really work. Again, coming back to D&D so focused on combat, and he says, well, there is Alien, the role-playing game. True. And I actually did a solo playthrough of a scenario that I built on the fly on this channel, and I really love the Alien role-playing game, and I am going to run Chariot of the Gods at one point. And I also agree with him that with building better worlds, the Alien franchise has opened up to the idea that you can have campaign play. Absolutely, I totally agree with him. But there are very few gaming engines that are, and scenarios that are less focused on combat than Alien, because that's what you do. Space is empty, it's hostile, it's dark, it's boring. It is boring. And the only thing you do is you travel from planet to planet. You exploit those planets, moons, whatever, to get all of the raw materials. And every so often you run into either an android, some kind of a corporate android that's gone rogue, or a group of smugglers. That's already up there, but usually you run into alien species and they try to kill you. That's how this works. There's no such thing as trying to communicate with them, trying to establish a common understanding. If it's alien, it's gonna kill you. That's it. And there is a lot of killing and fighting involved. And in Alien, I want to say cinematic scenarios, you almost have PvP, because everyone has their different agendas, and basically they will at some point, if you're very unlucky, collide. So if D&D is very battle focused, then, and too battle focused for your taste, don't play Alien. In addition, again, Alien being a completely different setting, being a horror scenario, horror survival type game, whereas D&D isn't. And so next to tropes, which doesn't make any sense, because of all of the fantasy-based ones, this is probably the most open one, with the most diverse ways of playing, with the most diverse species, with the most diverse settings. The next one is, like I said, it's so battle-focused. None of the games that he suggested are less battle-focused. I would even argue that they are more battle-focused. That doesn't make them good or bad. It just means his argument is null and void. And then the one that I really liked the best was, you shouldn't be playing D&D because there are so many other games out there. That's like saying you shouldn't be driving a Toyota because there are so many other car brands out there. Okay, that's not an argument at all. It doesn't make sense. Just because there is a lot of choice out there doesn't mean that the choice that I have made is wrong, and I shouldn't have made that. If he's trying to say other role-playing games should be given a chance, sure. Having said this, role-playing games usually are quite expensive. So if you have bought D&D, why should you buy something else? Just because there are other things out there? I mean, I, at 51, with a lot of disposable income, am actually doing this. When the OGL scandal hit, first of all, I started backing Kickstarters for other games immediately. Shadow Dark, Dragonbane. Dragonbane, by the way, a game that, you know, reading the rules, I was like, I'm never going to play this. So not interested, but they got my money. I immediately took out a pre-order for Fantasy Age 2nd edition, because I wanted these creators to know, yes, there's a market for your games, and yes, I'm here to support you. A lot of them, especially Shadow Dark, had to go through the whole thing that was already ready to go to Kickstarter to make sure that there was no infringement of any D&D related IP. And I was like, yeah, you can't treat people like this. So we supported them immediately. Have I played Shadow Dark? No, I've got the deluxe version. I haven't played it. Not interested, actually. I may be doing a solo run through at some point. Dragonbane, absolutely not my cup of tea, but I supported them, you know. So, but to say, because there are so many others, you shouldn't be playing this. And which brings me to why I'm making this video. Because this year, at the moment, and today is the 29th of December 2024, at this moment in time, I am actively playing or running campaigns in the following systems. The Dark Eye, Das Schwarze Auge, running 1, playing in 2 campaigns. D&D 5th edition, playing in 1 campaign, running another. D&D 5.5, running a campaign. Beyond the Wall, playing in a campaign. Unnameable Cults, Unaussprechliche Kulte. I don't know if it was ever translated into English. It's a Spanish role-playing game. I'm playing in it. this year in 2024, I have played and or run the following systems: Call of Cthulhu Modern, Vampire the Masquerade V20, Modern Age, and Powered by the Apocalypse Monster of the Week. So 5 additional ones. So I would say that I've got plenty of different systems to choose from at the moment. And I did do the Alien playthrough, and as you may know, I'm heavily invested in Coriolis, the Third Horizon at this stage. So even in 2024, I have gotten a lot of exposure to different games, to different game systems, not only playing but also running them, but also just investigating them. And of course, year 0, I've spent a lot of time with the SRD. Even 2 days ago, I spent half a morning just statistically number crunching the difference between the step dice and the dice chucker 6-sided dice approach. And less than a week ago, someone in my family actually got exposed to D&D for the first time. They sat down, they wanted to play, they created a character, and they were taken through an RPG duet campaign. Well, one shot. It was 5.5, and they loved it. In preparation, they wrote a 1-page backstory for their character. They totally loved it. So now they're like, can we keep playing? And can somebody else join in? So 2 more people, would that be possible? Because it gave them all they wanted to get. I doubt that they would have gotten the same happiness out of Alien because of the setting. I doubt that they would have gotten the same satisfaction out of Shadow Dark because of the mechanics, where it's like you go into the dungeon, you go. Because that's completely different. I doubt that they would have had the same satisfaction playing Pathfinder 2nd edition, because Pathfinder is super, super complex. And I know because I've played Pathfinder 1st edition to excess. And it is a great system if it's what you want and if it's what you like. But if you're new, I think it's highly inaccessible. But then again, this new player was simply given the player's handbook. No supplements, nothing. This is what you have. Choose. And this person had a blast. They were so happy. They enjoyed themselves so much. So don't tell me you shouldn't be playing D&D. If you want to play D&D, if you want several worlds at your disposal, if you want choice, but not at the cost of having to number crunch and sit there with a calculator, as you do with Pathfinder. Pathfinder is elegant if a crunchy system is your thing. Absolutely. Probably second to none. Then D&D is your friend. And I will also say the fact that D&D has the exposure it's got, the fact that D&D is debated hotly, the new edition that's just come out is hotly debated again, is because of its age, but also because it has managed to sustain momentum. And it has come back from 4th edition. This is something that we must not forget. Leaving out marketing or whatnot, 4th edition could have killed D&D. It nearly did. But 5th edition resurrected it. Because at its core, it is interesting and it speaks to people. And people enjoy it. And of course, you also have the fact that you cannot go onto YouTube and not be exposed to D&D playthroughs. And yes, there is the critical role effect. Yeah, it has made it even more accessible because people have been able to watch what it's like. And of course, the fact that different people have really come out and said, oh yeah, I play D&D, like Vin Diesel and other people like Deborah and Wool, has made it more acceptable. But that goes for role-playing in general. And so this is my defense against people saying, you shouldn't be playing D&D. I actually think if you want to play fantasy role-playing games, and if you want a world that doesn't limit you, where you can go in many directions, take D&D 5th edition and give it a try. It's not rules light, it doesn't claim to be. But rules light games are often not really rules light. They're just, a lot of the time, lazy and sloppily written because people couldn't be asked to actually sit down and come up with a rule set that helps. Rules light doesn't mean there shouldn't be any rules and everything is open to whatever happens at the table. You need a certain rules framework. That doesn't need to be complex. That should be laid out in very clear terms, no flourishes, no flowery language, but just this is what you do, and this is what you do, and this is what you do. Everything else is filled in at the table. And then it really depends on the people at the table, which way they want to go. Do they want to go combat? Do they want to go dungeon crawl? Do they want to go investigating? Because you can play investigative games using D&D rules. It's not a problem at all. Or do you really want to just go out there and kill that red dragon? You can do it all. And I'm not saying play only D&D. There are other games out there, and depending on what we want to play, we choose a different system. But if somebody goes out there and says, you shouldn't be playing D&D because, or you shouldn't be playing Alien because, or you shouldn't be playing this, this, and this because, don't listen. If it makes you feel good, if it makes you feel happy, if there is fun to be had at your table, virtual, solo, or literal table with your group, you are playing the right game. You are playing the right game. And that's all, and probably the last video of the year. And I wish you all a happy and healthy 2025. Talk to you soon. Bye.